Hello and welcome to today's video. In today's video, I want to talk about a classic episode of Star Trek. Star Trek is a franchise that has been running now since the 1960s in various iterations, and every one of them has had something important to say about the politics of the day. Right from its beginnings as a television series in the mid-1960s, Star Trek had politics encoded into its DNA. In many ways, this was because of the political thinking of the Star Trek creator, Gene Roddenberry. Roddenberry had a particular idea about human nature and about how humans as a species would change in the future, about how essentially we would grow, we would become adults. He was then a utopian, an idealist. What often made Star Trek special, though, was that Roddenberry's idealism often clashed in very interesting ways with the different political understandings brought to the show by the people that Roddenberry worked with. In the 1960s, the new Star Trek TV series became arguably the premier outlet for science fiction storytelling. Roddenberry attracted very well-known writers of science fiction to work with him on Star Trek, including in the episode we're going to discuss today, The City on the Edge of Forever, written by the famous science fiction writer Harlan Ellison. It was when Roddenberry's idealism clashed with the different things brought to Star Trek by other writers that the show was at its best. Particularly in 1960s network television, it wasn't possible to discuss controversial political issues directly. You had to do it through metaphors and allusions and allegories. This, of course, is something that science fiction excels at. City on the Edge of Forever is a particularly important and interesting story for us to look at because it's a time travel story. And I think it's a time travel story even beyond the parameters of the events that are portrayed in the episode. This was an hour of network television, first broadcast in 1967. It purported to tell the story of humans of the future in the 23rd century. And in this particular episode, the story is about the 1930s. So you've got a 1960s imagining of the future, and then an imagining of what people in the future will think of our past. How would the 1930s look from the perspective of the 23rd century? How would we evaluate the actions of the leaders of states, and indeed the actions of ordinary people during that period? This is a question that's asked in The City on the Edge of Forever. We open on the USS Enterprise being buffeted by time quakes from the planet below. While treating the injured crew, Dr. Leonard McCoy accidentally injects himself with a powerful psychotic drug. High as a kite, he flees the ship by beaming down to the planet in a state of delirious paranoia. Captain Kirk and First Officer Spock follow him and find the source of the time quakes, the Guardian of Forever, a portal to the past that is replaying images of Earth's history like a television that you can step right into. Pictures of the First World War and the 1920s flash by, and a ranting McCoy suddenly steps forward, runs through the portal before Kirk can reach him, and disappears. Kirk and Spock immediately lose contact with the Enterprise above, and the Guardian tells them why. McCoy, in the past, has changed history so that the ship, the Federation, and the Earth they knew no longer exists. The images of the past begin to cycle again, and Spock concludes that their only option is to go back to a point just before McCoy changed the timeline and stop him. Kirk and Spock follow McCoy to Depression-era America, but he is nowhere to be seen. On the run from the police, after stealing clothes to replace their 23rd century space uniforms, the captain and first officer seek refuge in the 21st Street Mission, run by the intriguing humanitarian Edith Keeler, played by a young Joan Collins. Offered work, food, and lodging by Keeler, Spock sets about trying to jury-rig a primitive computer system in order to pinpoint McCoy's timeline-altering influence, while Kirk falls in love with Edith Keeler. It's a beautifully played romance. Keeler is a Depression-era dreamer who sees a future where humankind makes great progress, tapping vast energy stores, maybe even the atom, to power flight beyond the stars, curing hunger, poverty and war on Earth at the same time. Although Kirk is hiding his true identity, Keeler sees something of the future in him and is charmed by his ignorance about popular movie stars of the time, such as Clark Gable, and hit music, like the lilting "Good Night, Sweetheart," the strings of which swell in the background. Good night, sweetheart. Till we meet tomorrow. Spock has discovered that he and Kirk meeting Keeler is not a coincidence. His computer, cobbled together from 1930s vacuum tubes and the 23rd century equipment he brought through the time portal, furnishes him with two documents: an obituary of Edith Keeler, dated just a few days from now, and a record of her meeting on issues of international peace with President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1936, several years hence. These documents can only come from two different timelines. In the 1936 time stream, Keeler becomes the leader of an influential pacifist movement, and Spock reads that over the coming years, she persuades Roosevelt to delay American entry into the Second World War. This delay allows the Nazis to complete their heavy water experiments into atomic energy. Armed with the A-bomb, Hitler wins the war, and Earth's history takes a terrible turn. If Keeler dies in the next few days, Spock deduces, then FDR will not be exposed to her uniquely persuasive brand of pacifism, and the original timeline will be restored. Edith Keeler must die, Spock tells Kirk. I think I'm in love with Edith Keeler, Kirk replies. Do good people sometimes make it possible for evil to triumph? If Keeler lives, her pacifism, her humanity, and her beauty as a person will bring on the tragedy of World War. Her good intentions will lead to a terrible outcome. Kirk and Keeler walk back through the cool city night, the strains of Goodnight Sweetheart lilting in accompaniment. They're reminiscing about the movie they've just seen. Parallel with the entrance to the 21st Street mission, but across the street, Keeler smiles and asks Kirk, "How can you not know who Clark Gable is? You're just like that other strange fellow who came into the mission this morning," she continues. "McCoy." Kirk is stunned, and at that moment, McCoy appears from the entrance of the mission. Kirk runs to greet him, telling Keeler to wait on the sidewalk. There's a triumphant reunion between Captain and ship's doctor, and the camera pans to Edith Keeler, entranced at the scene of these two strange men greeting each other like old friends. She begins to cross the street. A car speeds into view, unseen by the distracted Keeler, but clearly visible to Kirk and McCoy. McCoy starts out to push Keeler aside, and in a split-second choice, Kirk holds him back. The car crashes into Edith Keeler, whose obituary appears in the newspaper later that week. The time stream is fixed. Kirk's future is restored, and his heart is broken. Idealists, the first school of thought in modern IR, believe that good people like Edith Keeler, acting ethically, can transform the world into a Pacific paradise. Realists, who emerge to challenge idealists and who we're going to talk about next time, believe people are inherently prone to conflict, and idealists are therefore not only wrong, but they're naive and they're dangerous. They're doomed to facilitate the triumph of evil. Keeler's alternate future, where her actions allow Hitler to win the Second World War, is to realists an example of the danger in seeing the world as we want it to be, rather than as it is. But that's a story for next time.
Good night, sweetheart, till we meet tomorrow. Good night, sweetheart, sleep will banish sorrow.